Hey, I just finished reading this book that I wanted to recommend to you. I thought it was really helpful and good. It's called By What Standard, put out by our friends over at Founders Press. It's a book about deals a lot with a lot of the things that evangelicals are talking about these days: critical race theory, intersectionality, social justice, cultural Marxism, egalitarianism, identity politics, all those kinds of issues that are being discussed. And I think it's a very helpful book that I want to recommend to some of my friends. I mean, I only got like 5 or 6 people watching these videos, but I thought I'd send it out there and say I just finished reading it and let you know it's a great book. I think it's very helpful. It's a collection of chapters by a lot of different authors. I like to go through some of them. I'll start out with, let me start out with the appendix, the last chapter. I'm not sure why it's an appendix and not just one of the chapters. Maybe because it's lots longer. I don't know if it was longer or not. I think it was. I didn't do a page count or anything, but it's a little bit different tone. It's a little bit more academic. And there's like 196 footnotes in it, so that'll tell you something. But it's by a guy named Timon Cline, and it's a very helpful, very good. And so I think it's worth the price of the book, just that one chapter. I say the price of the book, even though you can actually read it for free on Founders' website. I'll put a link in the description if you want to just go and read that. But I would recommend getting the whole book and supporting the guys over at Founders that are doing a great job. But the reason why that chapter especially, but really the whole book, I commend to you and say that this is the kind of thing that needs to happen right now in our discussions of all these things: critical race theory and all the rest, social justice. This is the kind of thing that needs to happen. And this is why. This is why. Because a lot of the discussion that's happening right now is, on Twitter, Facebook, social media, YouTube, blogs, those kind of things. And I'm not saying that's bad. I think that's helpful. That needs to happen as well. I mean, I'm the admin of a pretty active Southern Baptist group on Facebook, and so I'm very engaged at that, bottom level, grassroots kind of level. Just everyday guy kind of level. But the discussion, I think, if we're going to advance and make progress, needs to happen on this kind of level. Books need to be published. Articles need to be written. Academic articles like Timon Cline article here on identity politics and need to happen at a full, robust theological level. Because if not, we're going to fall into some traps. And one of the things, I'll give you some examples. I'll get gritty about it. A lot of people have posted these video clips, of things that some of our Big Eva guys are saying. I'll give you an example. J.D. Greer, a year or two ago, said, and there's this little video clip of him saying that we need to tear down all hierarchy. And I saw that, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And so when somebody like J.D. Greer says that, there's a few different reactions. There's some of us who are, familiar with the topics, familiar with what's going on, that's sort of our hobby, reading about kind of stuff and keeping up with trends in thought processes and the biblical worldview and all the rest. And we're horrified with that, and rightly so. We're like, wait a minute. And so we see a little video like that. But then there's other guys, I think, that see that, and they're equally horrified, but more of like on a visceral level. Like, there's something wrong with that. They can't really articulate it, but they realize something's wrong with that. And that's why a book like this is very helpful. It explains why and what's the theological background behind some of these things and why we ought to be opposed to them. That we're not just out there with sort of a reactionary thing. Does that make sense? And then there's other people that see it and say, what's wrong with that? And they kind of go along with it. It kind of makes sense to them. And so we can put some of these video clips together, like you see. Sometimes it's a montage of different ones, like the Cinedoc, the documentary that goes along with this book. And I'm not criticizing it, but I'm just saying because they do take the time to explain a lot of things in the Cinedoc, but like the trailer for it and others, to get our attention. But there's some people that are like, I don't see any problem with that. And they kind of are buying into it. And so that's why I'm recommending a book like this that explains what's wrong with some of those things. For example, I'm thinking of the video with Matt Hall of the dean at Southern Seminary, and he has this video where he's kind of hunched over his laptop and has his headphones in. He's zooming with somebody or something. I don't know exactly what the context was. It didn't look like something that was really designed for public consumption. But he says, "I'm a racist. I've always been a racist. I always will be a racist. I'll be a racist till the day I die." And some people are like, what? What? And they don't know what's going on with that. And then you clip in a few other videos of him sitting in a room with a bunch of black pastors and things, saying some things that basically are just bullet points right out of the book White Fragility, which is a horrible book, by the way. I read it. Horrible book. And he's saying some of these things, and if you kind of understand what's behind it, you're horrified, and we should be. But there's others that are like, yeah, that kind of makes some sense. And so we need to fight against that, not just with Twitter, which, like I said, go ahead and do that. I don't care. But some more thoughtful things. And this is why, let me get a little bit even grittier than that. In our Southern Baptist circles, there are some people that are advancing and buying into some of this critical race theory, intersectionality, what we would call NeoMarxism, which I think is, they kind of balk at that terminology, but and so the discussion needs to advance. People like Walter Strickland at Southeastern, under Danny Akin's leadership, that seems to have really bought into a lot of these things, and Danny Akin seems to be complicit with it, and some of us are very troubled by that, and or closer to home with me is I love Southern Seminary. I went to New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, but at Southern under Al Mohler, and there's some guys there saying some things that I think are not very helpful. Matt Hall, for example, and Curtis Woods, and especially Jarvis Williams. And some people here's what I'm getting at. Some people are calling for them to be fired and are mad at Mohler for not just unilaterally just firing these guys. And I want to say, hold on, time out. Slow down, cowboy. We need to discuss these issues. Now, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong. Some of my friends are watching this, probably only a few, but don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we just ought to sit back and be apathetic about it. What I'm saying is that I'm commending books like this, that this is the kind of thing that needs to happen. Especially Timon Cline's article that needs to happen, that we need to discuss these things. And I'm a Southern Baptist. I've been a Southern Baptist since I was in a nursery, right? I've been pastoring a Southern Baptist church now for 26 years. I have multiple degrees from Southern Baptist seminaries. I'm a Southern Baptist. I'm a child of the conservative resurgence. I was in high school when they met at Cafe de Mont. And so, I'm all in with all of that. And so don't hear me saying anything otherwise. But at the same time, I don't want our seminary professors to be walking on eggshells, worried that they're going to get fired because a Twitter mob didn't like something that they said taken out of context. That's not where we want to go with this. Now, some people are saying that's not what's happening. I'm not saying that's what's happened, but that's what's being called for. People are saying it ought to be self-evident. Well, it's not self-evident to a lot of people. That is why some thoughtful, because look, we cannot defend Western civilization by acting like savages. We just want somebody's head over the wall. We want a pound of flesh. No, Southern Seminary is one of the most prestigious academic theological institutions in the world. And if we're going to maintain that, and I think we should, I don't want to lose that kind of thing. We need to do things properly and in accord with civilized things. And so what needs to happen is not a board trustee meeting saying, we need to fire these guys. Well, why? Well, I saw something on Twitter. No. We need to be able to demonstrate why things are in conflict with our confessional statements. Southern Seminary has the Abstract of Principles. Of course, we all have the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. And so, see, that's why these issues, critical race theory and other things, are a little different than the inerrancy controversy. That was much more cut and dry. Critical race theory is a very complex thing. I know some people want to say, "Oh, it's just simple. It's just cut and dry." No, it's not. It's a complex thing, and so it's not self-evident. That's why it's such a problem right now, because it's not self-evident. Work still needs to be done. And don't hear me saying it doesn't need to be done. My point is that I'm commending books like By What Standard. I'm commending things like, especially what Timon Cline did in this article. It needs to be not just little short Twitter blurbs, but put into print, published in books. This is the kind of article, actually, I think that needs to be in JETS. I don't take JETS any longer. JETS is the Journal for the Evangelical Theological Society. I don't know. I don't really follow. I'm not kind of swimming in that academic world anymore. But and so I don't know if these things are being discussed at ETS, but they need to be. They need to be. In order for us to advance this thing, this is the kind of thing that needs to happen. Okay. Well, let me get into some specifics, because I wanted this to be. I was going to make this a short video. I don't think it's going to be all that short, but I'll try to be as succinct as possible. In Cline's article or paper in the appendix of By What Standard, he deals with. I think the title is "Identity Politics and the Bondage of the Will." And of course, the bondage of the will. He's talking about Martin Luther's, bondage of the will. If you're not familiar with that, this might be kind of over your head. But in the bondage of the will, Martin Luther talks about our nature. And he's not the only one. I mean, the reason Cline's is pointing to that is because that's sort of a touch point where our Reformed theology and Protestant theology flows out of, and so it's a good place to look about the nature, the Christian worldview, a biblical worldview for the nature of human beings. That human beings are created in the image of God, the Imago Dei, and they're created with free moral agents. And so there's that whole discussion there. And he deals with it not on a sociological level, but on a more anthropological level, the doctrine of man, the biblical anthropology, that we're free moral agents, so we make decisions, that we're created in the image of God, and that whole discussion there. And then contrasting that with identity politics, where in identity politics that borrows from Marxism, of your identity is in your class, your oppressed class, or you're in the oppressor class, and so it's not, your identity is not rooted in the Imago Dei, but your identity is in your social group. And so that's where identity politics comes in, and Cline explains a lot of that. And that's where it ends up in popular culture, for example, with people like Joe Biden saying, have you seen this clip? Joe Biden saying to a black guy, "If you don't vote for me, you're not really black." And now some people are like, "What?" And if you hear Joe Biden saying something like that, and you're like, "What in the world?" You know why you're horrified with that? Because you're coming at it from a Christian worldview. Because you have this biblical lens. Even if you're not a Christian, you're like, something's not right there. Because you're coming at it from the biblical worldview that we have inherited, that legacy in Western civilization. But then there's others who are like, yeah, who are agreeing. Why? Because they're steeped in this totally different worldview. You know, they went to public school and they've been trained by this Marxist worldview philosophy, critical race theory and critical theory and all kinds of stuff. Even if they don't know the terminology, they might say, yeah. And so these things are clashing. And so what we need to do as Christians on an academic level is explain why some of these things are antithetical to our confessional statements, for example. That's why I was talking about at a trustee meeting at Southern Seminary. The conversation needs to get to the point where it is self-evident that some of these issues are at variance with our confessional statements, and then some change can happen. And so it takes a little time. I know we're used to things happening yesterday in our high-tech, fast-paced world, but it takes a little time. I'm not talking about generations, but it takes some time for things like this to happen. And so that's why I'm commending the book and praising it and cheering for it and for other work to do. This needs to be happening in the academy. It needs to be happening in publications. And I appreciate Tom Ascol and those guys kind of spearheading this and making it known. But we need a lot more voices like that. And so let me talk about some of the other articles before I shut this video off. Tom Ascol, of course, has a couple of articles in there. I'm a big Tom Ascol fan. I love Tom Ascol. Been following what he's been doing with Founders Ministries for over 20 years. I won't take the time to kind of give a personal testimony of how God used Founders Ministries and other things to open my eyes to the doctrines of grace when I was a young pastor over 20 years ago. And I was given a Founders Journal by a fellow student at New Orleans Seminary, and just devoured it and started reading a bunch of stuff and doing other things. And so I owe a great debt of gratitude to Tom Ascol, especially in those years. That's way back when Calvinism was the hot topic. Sometimes I joke, man, the good old days when all we had to do was fight about Calvinism, and now all these other crazy things. But I appreciate Tom Ascol and all the others that are associated with Founders Ministries over the years. And so Tom Ascol has a couple of great chapters in here. And then Jared Longshore, who's now Pastor Tom's kind of little sidekick down there in Cape Coral. Which, by the way, I could go on and on about Tom Ascol and not only Founders Ministries, but also their church down at Cape Coral has been such a tremendous blessing to me over the years. I won't take the time to talk about when they came after Hurricane Katrina. I'm on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and their church came numerous times and even did a vacation Bible school with us, with Tom's kids, Sarah and Hannah and Rachel and the rest of them. And they came, and Ken, who's their music guy, and just love those guys so much and appreciate them so much. And now Jared Longshore is down there with them and doing a great job. I don't know Jared personally, but he seems to be a really sharp guy and very articulate. He writes well. Some of the things that he writes about the sexual revolution and what the root of that is, and some of the ways that he words that as well is very helpful, I think. And then, of course, Voddie Baucham. Voddie Baucham has 3 chapters in the book that are classic Voddie Baucham. And now, to be honest with you, in Voddie Baucham's 3 chapters, I think he does cultural Marxism, critical race theory, no, not critical race theory, cultural Marxism, racial reconciliation, and ethnic Gnosticism. And so those are 3 issues that he talks about a lot. And if you've followed Voddie Baucham for a long time, like I have, all of that stuff is going to be familiar to you. Some of it exact wording from other places. And so, but if you haven't been, it's going to be very eye-opening. I mean, his stuff on ethnic Gnosticism is genius. I think he came up with that terminology years ago. Before I heard woke ethnic Gnosticism, Voddie Baucham is explaining what's kind of going on behind in people's minds with identity politics and all the rest. That is really, it makes a connection between the first century heresy of Gnosticism, that this special knowledge that if you don't supernaturally have or something, and saying that's how some people are. Well, if you just don't understand if you're not black, and there's standpoint epistemology and those kinds of things associated with that. I think genius. It really is very familiar to any of us who were interacting with, what was that movement several years ago. They're real postmodern, the emergent church, because a lot of those guys were saying something similar, not according to race-based Gnosticism, but this sort of this, you just don't get it, type of thing. I remember interacting with one guy online in a discussion group. This is a long time ago when the emergent church stuff was on, and I said, that sounds a lot like Gnosticism, the ancient heresy of Gnosticism. And you know what the guy says? Yeah, he kind of took it as a compliment. He says, yeah, we really like ancient Christianity. Like, you got to be kidding me. And so I don't know whatever happened to those guys, all the emergent church guys, but that kind of fizzled out. There's sort of a new reincarnation of that in social justice stuff today. I think Phil Johnson tries to make a one-to-one connection there, but it seems like different guys, because a lot of this social justice stuff is coming from guys that were on our team just a few years ago. The Calvinists. And so anyway, so Jared Longshore, Tom Nettles, Dr. Nettles has a chapter or so in there, which is very helpful. Dr. Nettles, too, I owe a great debt of gratitude to Dr. Nettles. I've been reading Dr. Nettles stuff for a long time. Actually, I came very close to pursuing a PhD in church history, and in part because of Dr. Nettles and reading his stuff. I'm very interested in Baptist history, and sometimes I still regret that I didn't do that, because very interested in Baptist history, especially Baptist history in the 1800s. I love reading those old sermons from the 1800s. I wish we could recapture some of that. They're under attack now. They're getting thrown under the bus by everybody. But some extraordinary theology and extraordinary men that we want to stand on their shoulders. And so I appreciate Dr. Nettles and all that he's done over the years. His chapter here in the book is on biblical justice versus social justice, which is a very helpful discussion because, see, the terminology social justice, and I said this way back when Tom Ascol and Phil Johnson and other guys published that statement on social justice in the gospel. When they did that, it was a great document, by the way. I appreciate Pastor Tom sending me an early copy of it and signed it before it went public. I think I was the 70th signature on that document. Now there's over 10,000 people, I think, have signed it. And so I think it's very helpful. But I said back then to some of my friends, I said, I don't know how much traction we're going to get fighting against something called social justice, because it sounds good to a lot of people. If you don't know what's going on, social justice, why are you against social justice? What are you for, social injustice? And now the conversation has kind of shifted a little bit to critical race theory. That sounds a little scarier, and so that's kind of good. But I'll give you an example of social justice. A church that I know of in another state was talking to me. They were looking for a pastor. They weren't looking to me as a pastor, but they're looking for a pastor, and they had a pastor search committee, Southern Baptist churches do. And the congregation was telling the pastor search committee, this is the kind of pastor that we're looking for, and there's some of the qualifications, and that discussion was taking place. And somebody in the church said, we need to ask these pastoral candidates what their views on social justice are, and was pretty concerned with it. Well, the people that were on the committee and other people in the church, a couple of them asked me, what are they talking about? Apparently they didn't have the discussion in the church, but didn't really understand. They said they kind of sounded like it was a negative thing. What exactly is that? And so I had to explain to them what is social justice and the distinction between social justice and biblical justice. And Dr. Nettles deals with that issue in the book and making that clear distinction, because basically in a nutshell, and he fills it out, so read the book, but basically in a nutshell, biblical justice deals with equality under the law. That like in the Constitution, all men are created equal. There's equality under the law. But social justice looks for equality of outcome. If you're familiar with that terminology, especially in communism and stuff, it's equality of outcome. And those are two very, very different things, very, very different things. And And so Tom Nettles deals with that in his great chapter. And then there's, let's see, who else is in there? Mark Coppenger. I love Dr. Coppenger as well. Dr. Coppenger used to be the president at Midwestern, and then then he wasn't. I should edit that out. But then he was at Southern Seminary. And just a great guy, great chapter, by the way. He's retired now, but a great chapter in the book. By the way, I was kind of had some interaction with him. I don't know Dr. Coppenger personally, but we had some interaction on Facebook and a Facebook group. And he mentioned to me that when I was talking about some of the other things that he had written, that he's working on a book now, if I understand him right. And I think it's on social justice and stuff. So that'd be very exciting to hear him on those issues, because I really highly respect Dr. Coppenger. But his book, the chapter in the By What Standard, is on biblical masculinity. I forgot the title of the chapter, but it's basically on biblical masculinity. And he does kind of take a little bit different angle that I thought was refreshing. Not different, but I thought was refreshing in this way, because a lot of times in our discussions on complementarianism versus egalitarianism, if you're familiar with that, guys on our team, the complementarians, guys on our team, a lot of times when they talk about biblical masculinity, they spend most of their time sort of apologizing for masculinity. They're dealing with the accusations of misogyny and toxic patriarchy and things, and they spend most of their time saying, well, we don't mean this, we don't mean that, we don't mean this other thing, and it almost sounds like apologizing. And it was refreshing to me that Dr. Coppenger really didn't see any need to apologize, didn't see any need to kind of soften it up. He just full-blown, look, this is mature masculinity. I think that was the title of the book, Mature Masculinity. And so he just full-throated talking about these issues. For example, I think of one page where he's talking about strong men, the sort of the stereotype, the surface stereotype that people have of masculinity being strong, and other guys are kind of saying, well, that's not exactly what we mean. He's like, he didn't apologize for it at all. He's pointing to he said something like, the world operates. That's who keeps the world going, is strong, physically strong, masculine men. And he points to guys working at the port, and building skyscrapers. And he has that whole conversation, which was very refreshing. Very refreshing to me, especially because I pastor on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and the men in our community are strong men. Rough men. They're rough around the edges. I mean, you got to be to work on on the boats and at the port. And we got guys working at the port. We got a port right here, and plants, and there's shrimpers and crabbers, and welders. A lot of welders, and then on their spare time, they're hunting and fishing to actually get food, not just as a little hobby, but actually, they're just rugged men. I got one guy in my church, you shake his hand, you can almost cut your hand on his calluses on his hand. These are hardworking men. And so that's why I appreciate Mark Coppenger not apologizing for that. Men's responsibility under God is to provide for their families and protect their families, and to be strong men. Now, it's not only talking about physical strength, of course, but there's not a disconnect there. And so I thought that was a great chapter. And there's other chapters as well. I'm going to go ahead and cut this off because I've rambled too long and probably nobody's watching anyway. But I just wanted to recommend By What Standard by Founders Ministries, Founders Press. I'll put a link in the description where you can buy it. I'm not getting a cut or anything. I just think that it's a helpful tool that I want to help promote the book and encourage you to read it. Thanks so much.